Welcome to the Hidden Corners, where truth and terror collide. Discover a realm where the lines between the living and the supernatural blur, as you embark on a journey to the paranormal and visit the mysterious hidden corners of your mind. Well, good morning, everyone. Clay is out of town this weekend, working on a ranch, so you are stuck with me. I lost a few subscribers last time I read a story, so we'll see what happens this time. I know you all love Clay's voice, but, well, you're just going to have to put up with me this weekend. First, I want to mention that I've had a couple of emails stating that some of you are confused about the process of transformation into a werewolf. Specifically, why do my werewolves sometimes transform into the classic Hollywood version of a wolfman, half wolf, half man, and then other times they are like the lovable furry wolf dog that some people are raising? Well, there's been so much controversy about wolves over the years. I love the theory that the original werewolf stories were brought on by the fact that in olden times, people lived and worked in the forests that were full of dangers. There is so much historical fact in my books, like the story of Red Riding Hood and how the little girls actually wore red cloaks so they'd be seen by the hunters in the forest as they carried their milk or eggs or cheese from their family home to the markets in a basket. Children were often attacked by hungry wolves. And tales were spun back in those days to not only scare the children, but also because that was the time period that they lived in, and wolves were a very big part of their life. And since then, wolves have continued to remain in our lives. And then, of course, Hollywood brought up the whole idea of the Wolfman. I've chosen to describe my Wolfman, Jack Moore, as a bit of a superhero. He's a good guy, like Clay Steele, who just wants to see things go right in the world. So my werewolves, when they are very angry or in imminent danger, take on the form of the Wolfman. They have superhuman strength. They have the abilities of the wolf to hear and to smell and perceive danger. And yet they have the capability of thinking logically like a man. But when they are just transforming for protection maybe, or traveling undercover, or just needing to be in wolf form for whatever reason, they are fully transformed into the furry, four-legged wolf that can stalk and hunt and feel the emotions of a wolf while still keeping that thread of humanness to them. So anyway, this week, since Clay is gone, we are going to hear from the she-wolf. This is book 3 of the Wolfman Chronicles. It's actually part 35. Can you believe we've been reading this story now for 35 weeks? Unbelievable. This is chapter 11, The She-Wolf, and this takes place in Montana. The she-wolf speaks. Daily I watch and I wait like an intimate, secret stalker. He notices me at times. He feels my presence just as I am constantly aware of his. He has changed. He is always on edge, looking over his shoulder, watching the road and the woods. The threat of danger is ever present. I watch his interactions with Miguel, and I'm glad for his friendship, but jealous that it is not me who shares his meals and his laughter. I can only watch and wait. There are times when I cannot stand it, and I run as far away as I can, and I tilt my head back and howl loudly and mournfully. But it does not help my broken heart. He turned me away when I needed him most. It was a cold evening in Big Sky, Montana. Jack poured 2 glasses of whiskey and handed one to Miguel, who was sitting in front of the fire. The deputy called. They were able to get a pretty good portion of the cocaine back and quite a bit of the money in a strange turn of events. I don't know all the details yet, but apparently some friend of the kid that stole Buck Brady's truck tried heading into Canada and was pulled over just before the border. They're bringing it back here now, and we should see them sometime tomorrow. He told us to be ready for action. Word's already out on the street that I'm the one supplying the dope to the local dealers in St. Paul and Minneapolis. It shouldn't take long now. Starting tomorrow, this place will be crawling with trouble. Okay then, Miguel replied. I was getting damn bored sitting around here watching you mope around. Jack nodded his head and sighed. Let's just hope this all goes well. Have you talked to Juanita or Julian lately? I tried calling Kat a few hours ago, but she didn't pick up. No, it's been a couple of days since I spoke to any of them. Jack sighed. I just wanted to hear her voice, let her know everything was okay. I know she's worried about me. He paused and looked at his half-full glass of whiskey. By the way, have you noticed the wolf that's been hanging around the barn? I think she might have pups. I noticed a few sets of tracks out there. If you see her, just let her be. I don't think she's looking for any trouble. I haven't noticed, Miguel replied, but I'll keep my eye out. He grinned and chuckled. Maybe you got a she-wolf hot on your scent, Jack. Nope, I'm done with women, wolf or otherwise. Miguel swirled the whiskey in his glass. Have you called her yet? Jack paused, letting the words drift into a void of his own creation. No, he lied. He had actually tried to call her several times, but never completed the call. He would always start with the first few digits of her phone number, but never made it through the complete set of numbers before hanging up. What would he say to her after all these months had passed? He thought about the last time he gazed into her face, that last day at the airport in Helsinki. He heard her call his name, Jack, with so much longing and misunderstanding, but he had turned his back and walked away from her. He wondered where she was now. Russia? Norway? He wondered what had happened after she'd been found guilty of killing her husband. Her husband! The thought of that made the anger well up in him again. So many lies. Too many lies. That is why he never completed the call. But he hadn't expected to miss her so much. He hadn't realized how much he loved her until she was gone. He walked out onto the porch and looked up at the stars twinkling in the sky above the barn. As his eyes drifted down, he noticed a pair of yellow eyes staring at him through the dark. He watched her for a few moments, then turned and walked into the kitchen. He pulled the leftover extra piece of steak out of the refrigerator and cut it into pieces, then carried the plate outside. Walking towards the barn, he kept his eyes on the wolf till he was just a few paces away. Kneeling down, he set the plate on the ground in front of her. Quietly, he whispered, "I won't hurt you." "You already have," she thought, as she took a cautious step towards the plate of food. As he turned, he thought he saw 2 more sets of eyes a short distance away. He smiled and walked back into the house. "He brings me dinner. The pups will eat well tonight." She took a bite for herself, then nodded toward the 2 Aussies. They quickly devoured the rest of the meat. "He is kind," she told them, "but he is the only one. You cannot trust men." The 2 young dogs slinked back into the shadows. "When was the last time I walked on 2 legs?" she asked herself. "It seems so long ago. I feel as if I've forgotten how." She turned and trotted back to the warmth and safety of the barn and her 2 companions, her pack. Boarding the plane in Mexico went without a hitch. Juanita had prepared all the necessary paperwork for transportation of the wolves, and both she and Catherine had matching polo shirts embroidered with the logo of a wolf's head and the words Spirit Wolf Sanctuary underneath. Both women also wore a lanyard around their neck with ID cards that had their photograph and name. It all looked very official. The two caged male wolves were given enough sedative to sleep through the flight and had official signs attached to their cages with the words, "Do not touch, property of Spirit Wolf Sanctuary, handle with care." Landing at the airport in Bozeman, Montana, the two women walked to the car rental kiosk and rented a truck while waiting for the crates to arrive in the baggage claim office. The door to the office was locked and no one was inside. They looked for an attendant and tried banging on the door, but no one arrived to help them. Catherine finally flagged down a security officer who told them to sit and wait while he located someone who could help with the missing crates. The two wolves had woken shortly after landing and were anxious to be released. They had begun howling loudly and growled at the baggage attendants who were afraid to load the crates, leaving them on a freight dolly out on the tarmac. By the time Juanita and Catherine were escorted out to the crates, there was quite a crowd gathered around the cages, and animal control officers were already on the scene. Amidst the chaos, someone in the crowd yelled, "The only good wolf is a dead wolf." Catherine grabbed Juanita's arm before she could turn and confront the person. "Let it go," Catherine said quickly. "Let's just get out of here." Together they managed to load the crates one by one onto a rolling cart and wheeled them out to the truck, where they quickly opened the cages and led the wolves by leash into the truck cab before another crowd of onlookers surrounded them. Once the airport was well out of sight, Julian and Usko were able to transform back into their normal bodies and put on their clothes in the back seat. "That was the worst experience I've ever gone through," Julian exclaimed. "Cramped in that little cage? Now I know how my mother felt when they kept her caged during the war." "I'm sorry we had to do that, but it was the only way. And you're going to have to go through it again when we return," Juanita replied. "No way am I going through that again. Maybe we can drive back, all of us. I wouldn't mind so much if we weren't cramped in that cage for so many hours." "Let's just concentrate on getting to Jack for now. We can talk about our return later," Catherine replied. 3 black SUVs with men in black suits crossed the border into Montana, carrying several bags of pure white powder cocaine with a tracking device attached. Special Agent Mark Grant was thrilled with his success of stopping its crossing into Canada. It had been perfect timing. Stupid kid had taken it hard, though, he thought, remembering how he had cried when they'd handcuffed him and put him in the back seat of the squad car. He really thought he'd get away with it. Well, easy come, easy go. Now, with Jack's cooperation, he had every chance of reeling in the big catch. He had called in for reinforcements already. They'd have at least 20 men positioned at the ranch in various hidden locations, and more in town and at neighboring ranches. He'd managed to get the word out that Jack was squandering money like a fool, and some big deals were going down at the ranch. Another day or two, and it would reach the right ears. He had no doubt about that. They were already seeing signs of activity. One of his men, who had a broken-down vehicle just at the main entrance into town, had already reported seeing an increase in unusual traffic activity. It was easy to spot the drug dealers and the cartel's men from the everyday tourist because of what they drove and the tight, clenched look on their face as they drove past him. Local ranchers would stop to help. Even tourists would often stop to offer assistance for a broken-down vehicle. but the men they were looking for just stared straight ahead, ignoring the car that idled on the side of the road with its hood up. It was a 13-hour drive to Big Sky, 14 if you counted the hour they spent eating. Each car had 2 men taking a 7-hour shift of driving. They couldn't afford the time to stop for a night in a hotel. It was critical to get the drugs back to the ranch and be prepared for a showdown with the cartel's men. He had played the scene out in his mind 100 times. It would be just like in the movies, he thought. Jack would receive a phone call from a person of interest who would schedule a deal. Upon arrival at Jack's ranch, they would sit in the living room, staring at each other with guns in their belts, staring each other down. They'd test the purity of the cocaine, make sure it hadn't been tampered with or cut with filler. They'd verify that it was indeed the stolen supply from the C-Bar C Ranch in Colombia. And then, after that, all hell would break loose. Guns would be drawn. His men would burst into the room, preventing what would have become a slaughter, just like when they went after Angus and the other cowboys. But his men would get there first, and he'd go home the hero. That was the plan. On the long drive from North Dakota to Big Sky, Montana, he had plenty of time to play it over and over in his head. Mark Grant knew the cartel boss in Colombia was untouchable, but if he could capture the people responsible for warehousing it in the United States, he knew he could put a very large dent in the Colombian operation. It would earn him the promotion he'd been hoping for, and he'd be the man responsible for bringing down the largest criminal drug transportation ring of the decade. He'd been waiting a long time for this. Jack's ranch house and surrounding land was now outfitted with surveillance cameras showing the property at every angle. The main house had radio and cell phone contact with men who were strategically placed around the perimeter of the ranch. They were hidden in duck blinds, tree platforms used for hunting, fallen log and rock outcroppings, and in a few old rusty vehicles that had been strategically placed around the property. Everything was in place. Deputy Bill Riley arrived by noon in an unmarked vehicle along with his suitcase. He planned on staying at the ranch house for the next several days. At 2:00, Jack received a phone call from a man who identified himself as Hector Guerra. He had a strong accent and was curt and to the point. His men would meet Jack, and only Jack, to discuss a certain matter of importance. "Not possible," Jack replied. "My man Miguel will be here as well. I don't meet anyone without Miguel by my side." It was agreed, and the meeting was set. It was only an hour later when a call came in regarding a truck heading straight towards Jack's ranch. As it turned down the long dirt road that led to the ranch, dust billowed up, announcing its arrival. "Are you expecting anyone?" Bill Riley asked. "No." Armed and ready for a fight, Jack and Miguel peered out either side of the front window to see who had arrived. To their astonishment, out stepped Juanita, Catherine, Julian, and Usco. Jack burst through the door. "What are you doing here?" he yelled. "You can't be here." "I thought you'd be glad to see us." Catherine burst into tears. "What the—" Miguel didn't get a chance to finish his sentence. Juanita had already jumped up on the porch and had her arms around her brother. "We had to come. I couldn't keep her away. It was either Catherine by herself or all of us together," she explained. Jack looked at Catherine and shook his head. "I told you to stay in Mexico, where you'd be safe. You can't be here now. You couldn't have come at a worse time. We're about to have a showdown with the Colombian cartel drug lords, and you're stepping right into a battlefield," he yelled. Catherine couldn't stop crying. This was not the reaction she had hoped for. Usco held her and stroked her hair. "Look, Jack, we're sorry we didn't let you know we were coming. We thought Juanita told Miguel to tell you. That's what she told us anyway." Jack walked over and put his arms around his sister. "I'm sorry, Kat. It's just, things are out of control right now. This is a really dangerous situation. You shouldn't be here." She reached up and took Jack's hand and placed it on her belly. "I just wanted to tell you in person, Jack. You're going to be an uncle. I'm going to have a baby." Jack stood gaping at his sister's face in utter disbelief. Not only had she put herself and the others in danger by coming here unannounced, but to find out she was pregnant too? He felt the hair bristling on his neck. With clenched teeth, he took a deep breath and replied, "I'm happy for you, Catherine, but you need to leave now." She stared back at him for a moment, turned, and got back into the truck. Julian put his hand on Jack's shoulder. "I understand that you don't want to put the women in harm's way. Let them go to a hotel. Usko and I will stay and help you." Jack stared at him for a moment. He turned to Usko. "You go with them. Keep them safe. Take them to Yellowstone or someplace. Just get them the hell out of here. Julian, you can stay here. We could use your help." Julian kissed Juanita goodbye and sent the three of them away. Jack watched as the truck drove out of sight and the dust clouds settled. "Come on in, Julian. We'll fill you in on the details." From our hiding spot inside the barn, the three of us watch as the truck drives away from the ranch. I can feel Jack's anger and his worry. I think it's time to move to higher ground, move to a safer location. Tonight, under cover of the darkness, I will lead the pups above the ridge where we can watch from a higher vantage point. I am ready to sacrifice my life for him, but I must make sure these young dogs are safely away from the mayhem. Mark Grant arrived with the contraband and filled Jack, Miguel, and Bill Riley in on the details of how to proceed. It would look like only Jack and Miguel were there. Bill Riley's vehicle was already stowed away in the barn, and he'd be hiding upstairs when the deal went down. The house would be surrounded with Grant's men in the barn, the bunkhouse, the root cellar, and in various locations close to the property. He checked on the status of the men who were positioned further out near the main road and in each of the other locations on the property. Neighboring ranches were alerted and asked to evacuate for the next few days. Everything was ready for the cartel's men to arrive. "And where will you be?" Jack asked Grant. "I'll be in the surveillance van, watching the whole thing go down. I'll alert the men when it's time to move in," he replied. Jack slept restlessly that night in anticipation of the next day's events. After a couple of hours of fitful dreams, he was awakened by the sound of a gunshot somewhere in the distance. It was followed by another round of rapid fire. Jack jumped out of bed and ran downstairs. Miguel had heard it too, and had already made it down to the living room. Bill Riley came out of the other guest room downstairs and was already on the phone with Grant. "It was only a wolf. Someone shot at a wolf." Jack quickly looked at Miguel. "Where's Julian?" Julian was staying in the guest cabin on the other side of the bunkhouse. There were no lights on as Jack ran towards the cabin. He threw open the door, but the room and the bed were empty. Shots were sounding from every direction now. Jack ran back to the ranch house and grabbed his gun. Miguel was perched near the window, peering slightly through the edge of the curtain. Bill Riley was armed and doing the same from the kitchen window. "Do you see any movement?" Jack quickly asked. "No. Grant says we're surrounded, though," Riley yelled. Bill Riley was on his cell phone, and he turned on the speaker so Jack and Miguel could hear him. "There was a helicopter. They dropped their men in with parachutes. We've just intercepted their radio communication. It's in Russian. There's at least a dozen men with military backpacks and assault rifles. Our men are on them. We've got one down and one wounded. The others are running for the ranch, and they're in pairs." A moment later, he spoke again. "We've got a pack of wolves out here. They've attacked 2 of the men. Russians, not ours." Jack yelled, "Tell your men not to shoot any wolves." "Miguel, cover for me. I'm going out." Bill yelled at Jack to stay in the house, but he was already out the door and running toward the guest cabin. Leaving his clothes in a heap on the floor of the cabin, Jack ran out in his full wolf form. He hoped the FBI's men would adhere to Grant's directive not to shoot, but he knew he'd be a target to the Russians. What were they doing here anyway? Were they following Catherine? He wondered. His senses were much more acute now that he was in his wolf body. He could smell the perspiration of the men, and he could sense the direction of his mates, whoever they were. He knew Julian was out there, but who were the others? Inside the ranch house, Miguel and Bill saw movement just beyond the lilacs that bordered the side yard near the garden. "They're closing in on us. Get ready." Bill pushed the silence button on his phone and put his earphone back in. He could hear Mark Grant, but it was silent in the room. He motioned Miguel with his hand toward the back door to the kitchen. Miguel ran to guard that door, while Bill stayed at the front. Meanwhile, a steady play-by-play was coming through the phone from Grant. "We've got them on camera now. One's coming toward the front door, one at the back. He's near the porch. Coming from the right." Bill Riley took aim, and when Grant said, "Now," he yanked the door open and shot his pistol at the same time, hitting the assailant square between the eyes. The man fell at Bill's feet, dead. He stepped over the body, and pressing his body tight against the house, he turned the corner closest to the back door. The other man was kneeling just under the window and appeared ready to pull open the handle, probably figuring the man inside would look straight ahead and not down, giving him the second's advantage for the kill. He didn't get the chance. Bill Riley had shot him, and he lay crumpled against the door frame. He pushed the body out of the way as Miguel opened the door. "They're both down. Grant's men have taken down 4 and wounded 1. The wolves have taken down 4. That leaves 1 more out there. Right now, he's not in camera range, but he should be soon." "Grant says they've pulled the one who's still breathing. He may live long enough to tell us what the hell they're doing here. They aren't the cartel's men, that's for sure. Where's Jack?" "I'm sure he's guarding the barn and the cabin. Don't worry about him. And remind your men not to shoot at the wolves," Miguel replied. Riley shot him a sideways glance, and they both took their positions back at the windows of the house. Jack found the pack tearing apart a man who was now covered in blood. He recognized Julian by scent, and he saw the she-wolf who had been hanging around the barn. The 2 others were not wolves at all. They were dogs, Australian shepherds, tearing and ripping at the man as if they had turned completely feral. When they saw Jack approaching, they backed away and hid behind the she-wolf. The man was dead. His companion lay nearby with his throat ripped open. The dogs and wolves were covered in blood. It was impossible to see if they'd been hurt. Jack turned and trotted back towards the ranch house with Julian, the she-wolf, and the 2 dogs following close behind. He led them to the creek where they could drink and wash off the men's blood before returning to the ranch. They kept a wary eye out for the others, not knowing how many more were out there, or if it was even safe to return to the ranch. At least, there, Jack could watch over them, all of them. They were closer now. The cabin and the barn were in sight. Jack thought about the crawl space he had dug under the floorboards of one of the horse stalls. It was a place to hide guns, rare vintage bottles of wine or whiskey, or anything else that might need safeguarding. They rarely used it, but it had good ventilation and would be a safe haven for the wolf and her 2 dogs. He knew the Aussies had to be the 2 that went missing from the ranch when the massacre had happened. He was grateful the female wolf had taken care of them. Nature had a way of filling in the gaps, making things right when everything seemed wrong. He led them into the barn, and with a look that communicated, "Stay here," he and Julian trotted over to the cabin and changed back into their human form, quickly dressing. "How did you know to find them?" Jack asked. "It's the way of the wolf," Julian replied. "It's in my blood. Sometimes I think I'm more wolf than man." She was trying to get the dogs to safety and was spotted and shot at. That first gunshot alerted everyone to what was going on out there. She probably saved everyone's life tonight. No one saw that attack coming. Those men dropped in out of the sky, and if it weren't for that gunshot, they probably would have made their way right to the ranch house. Who were they anyway? The FBI agent said they were Russians. We were expecting the drug cartel. Do you think it's because Catherine is here? Jack asked. Julian replied, "It doesn't make any sense. If they were after Catherine, they'd have more easily attacked us in Mexico. We would have been easily overtaken there. I really don't think it has anything to do with Catherine." "Well, they don't have any reason to be after me. They don't have any reason to show up here at the ranch at all." Jack suddenly became very quiet. "Head over to the house and let Miguel know we're all right. I'm going to the barn to secure the dogs and the wolf in a safe place. We're probably still facing a showdown tomorrow, unless anyone's gotten word of this ordeal here tonight." Jack slowly walked towards the barn, sorting the night's events out in his mind. The wolf and the two dogs were sitting right where he had told them, waiting. Jack explained that he would protect them, that he was putting them in the wine cellar just to keep them safe, and promised he'd come back and let them out when everything was over. "Don't be scared," he assured the dogs, and he was certain they understood his every word. "I'll be back with food and water and some soft bedding." It was a good-sized room with wooden wine racks lining the walls and bottles that had been there for years. Buried underground, it stayed the perfect temperature year-round. They'd be safe there. He promised to return shortly with food and left the door ajar. Deep in thought, he walked back to the ranch house and checked in with the men. Bill Riley filled him in on the latest information from Mark Grant. There were 12 dropped from the helicopter. We killed 2 of them. Grant's men killed 4, wounded 1, and the wolves killed 4. That means 1 is still out there. We've got to watch our backs. They've taken the wounded one to the hospital, and they're hoping to get some information out of him. Do you have any idea why the Russians would be here? Grant doesn't believe it has anything to do with the Colombians, but we can't be sure. The timing does seem awfully coincidental. Jack shook his head. Nope, no idea at all. He proceeded to cook several burgers in a big cast iron pan on the stove, bacon in another, and pulled a dozen eggs out of the refrigerator. We might as well have some breakfast. I don't think any of us are getting any more sleep tonight. He and Julian took 3 large plates of food out to the barn, along with a large water dish. Miguel carried an armful of extra blankets. Just leave them here, Jack said. I'll be back in after a while. Once the other men were gone, Jack lay down the bedding and gave the dogs their food. With full bellies, the Aussies curled up on the blankets and closed their eyes. The wolf sat a few feet away from Jack, watching him as he sat down on the floor and started petting the young dogs. I want to thank you for protecting these 2 and for your help tonight, Jack said. I know you've been watching me since I arrived. The wolf crouched down, her head between her paws. He reached out his hand and put it near her. She nuzzled his fingers, licked his hand, and nuzzled it again. He smiled and touched the soft fur between her ears. What are you doing here, Sasha? And who are these men you're running from?